My name is Lena Corbin. For most of my 34 years, I have been a student of silence. I learned its weight in the hollow spaces after my father's praise for my sister, its texture in the unread reports I'd authored, and its shape in the rooms I was never invited to enter. I learned that silence isn't an absence of sound, but a presence of everything unsaid. And in the end, it was silence that taught me how to speak. Our family business, Corbin Dynamics, was born from the steel and foresight of my grandfather, but it was polished to a high sheen by my father's ambition. He was a man who loved the look of success more than the labor of it. I was the labor. From the time I could code, I was building the company's digital architecture from the ground up. I wrote the security protocols, streamlined the logistics, and negotiated the contracts that others would later announce at press conferences. My older sister, Serafina, was the announcement. She had our father's charisma and our mother's beauty, a combination that made her the perfect face for a legacy she didn't understand, but wore like a designer coat. I was the foundation. She was the facade. And for a long time, I told myself that was enough. That the integrity of the work was its own reward. But a foundation that is never acknowledged will eventually begin to crack. And on a crisp autumn morning in our Port Sterling headquarters, the first fissure appeared. It was the culmination of a year of sleepless nights. A $2.1 billion merger with a European tech conglomerate, a deal so complex and delicate it had become my entire world. I had personally flown to Zurich 6 times, learned the nuances of international trade law until my head ached, and built a rapport with their notoriously difficult CEO. My name, Lena Corbin, was on every page of the final agreement. My team, the ones who had worked alongside me in the trenches, were gathered in the main conference hall, their faces lit with a mixture of exhaustion and pride. Today was the celebration. The room buzzed with the low hum of anticipation. Journalists lined the back wall, their cameras poised. Board members and investors filled the front rows. A large screen behind the podium displayed the new, merged logo I had helped design, shimmering under the recessed lighting. My notes felt cool and steady in my hand. I was about to step up to the microphone, to finally give voice to the work that had consumed me, when the double doors at the back of the room swung open. My father, Marcus Corbin, strode in, his silver hair immaculate. On his arm was Serafina, radiant in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my first car. They were late, but they moved with the unhurried grace of people who believe the world waits for them. He didn't look at me. He walked directly to the podium, tapping the microphone with a practiced, charming smile. "Apologies for the delay," he announced, his voice booming with false bonhomie. "But some moments are worth the wait. And this is a historic one." My heart, which had been beating with quiet pride, began to thud with a different, colder rhythm. "This monumental achievement," he continued, gesturing expansively to the room, "is the result of the tireless vision and brilliant leadership of one person." He turned, his smile softening as he looked at Serafina. "My daughter and the future of Corbin Dynamics, Serafina Corbin." A ripple of confused, polite applause went through the room. A few of the European delegates glanced at me, their brows furrowed. They knew. They had spent months in meetings with me. My own team looked frozen, their smiles faltering. My father then placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look inclusive, but felt like an anchor. And of course, he added with a chuckle, she couldn't have done it without her diligent assistant, my other daughter, Lena. Assistant. The word landed in the silent room and shattered something inside me. It wasn't a loud break, but a deep, structural crack. 40 of the most important people in our industry, my colleagues, my partners, they all heard it. They all saw me relegated to a footnote in my own masterpiece. Serafina stepped forward, accepting the microphone. "Thank you, Daddy," she said, her voice a little too bright. She began her speech, stumbling over the name of the German CEO, misquoting the projected revenue by 100 million, and referring to the proprietary software I'd built as that clever little program. I didn't hear the rest of her words. I sank slowly into a vacant chair in the front row. The world narrowed to the small, company-issued tablet on my lap. Under the table, shielded from view, I swiped it on. My finger hovered over a single, innocuous-looking file named System Integrity Protocol 7. It was a failsafe I had designed 2 years ago, a lockdown sequence buried deep within the company's core operating system. It was designed to trigger in the event of a catastrophic security breach or a hostile takeover. It would freeze all Tier 1 executive access, suspend external communications, and place all active contracts into a secure, independent digital escrow. An escrow that could only be unlocked with my biometric key. At the time, my father had called me paranoid for insisting on it. An emergency brake we'll never need, he'd scoffed, before signing the authorization without reading the fine print. Today, it felt like providence. I looked at my father, beaming at his chosen heir. I looked at Serafina, her smile wavering as she caught the eye of a board member discreetly checking his watch. They hadn't just stolen my credit. They had erased my existence. And they had done it with a smile in a room full of people who knew the truth but were too polite, too intimidated, to speak it. My grandfather once told me that the quietest person in the room is the one you should listen to the most, because they are the one who is actually paying attention. I was paying attention. And with a single, deliberate tap on the screen, I made the entire company fall silent with me. The effect wasn't instantaneous or explosive. It was elegant. The massive screen behind Serafina flickered once, the shimmering logo dissolving into a placid blue field before going completely black. A collective, soft gasp rippled through the press corps. The teleprompter at the foot of the podium, which had been feeding Serafina her talking points, blinked off. Her voice faltered, the rehearsed words vanishing from her memory. As I was saying, she stammered, her gaze darting around the room for a lifeline. Then, one by one, the tablets in the hands of the board members and investors lit up with a single, stark message in clean, white font: access denied, signatory protocol violation. The Wi-Fi cut out. The live feed to our international offices went dead. The digital display of our stock performance flatlined. A low, electronic chime, a sound I had programmed myself, echoed softly from the room's speakers, the system's heartbeat monitor, now silent. The gentle hum of technology that was the constant background noise of our lives had simply ceased. The silence it left behind was profound. Serafina stared at the dead podium, her face pale. An executive from our London office leaned forward and whispered, "Is this a cyber attack?" My father's jovial mask finally cracked. His face, flushed with anger, turned toward the tech booth at the back. "What in God's name is going on?" he boomed. No one answered. All eyes slowly, inevitably, turned to me. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The silence in the room amplified my every word. "My apologies, everyone. It appears we're experiencing a technical issue with our leadership validation system." I paused, letting the phrase hang in the air. "The presentation will be postponed. Thank you for your time." I turned to leave. My father's heavy footsteps pursued me down the aisle. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep. "Lena, fix this. Now." His voice was a low, furious hiss. I met his gaze, my expression unreadable. For the first time in my life, I felt no fear, no need to placate him. I simply felt calm. "I'm afraid that's above an assistant's pay grade, Father," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I gently removed his hand from my arm, and I walked out. I didn't run. I walked with a steady, measured pace past the stunned faces, the dawning comprehension in the eyes of my team, the frantic whispering of the press. As the doors swung shut behind me, I heard someone ask, "What just happened?" The answer was simple. I had taken my name back. I went not to my own small office, but to the server nexus on the 3rd floor, a chilled, glass-encased room that was the true heart of Corbin Dynamics. The head of IT, a brilliant woman named Priya Nair who I'd hired 5 years ago, looked up from her console as I entered. Her screen was a cascade of red error logs. Protocol 7, she said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. She swiveled in her chair. I always wondered when you'd use it. I read the source code after you embedded it. It's a work of art, Lena. It's a legal failsafe, Priya. And the conditions were met, I replied, my voice even. She nodded, typing a few commands. The documentation is impeccable. Board approved, ratified in the bylaws 3 fiscal quarters ago. They can't touch you. Legally, you didn't break the system. You activated a feature. From behind the glass wall, I could see the chaos unfolding on the executive floor. My father was storming into his office, shouting into his phone. Serafina was pacing in the hallway, wringing her hands, her poise completely shattered. She looked up, and our eyes met through the glass. I saw confusion, then a flash of betrayal, and finally, a flicker of something that looked like fear. She was the one who looked away first. I didn't feel a surge of victory. I felt a quiet, somber clarity. This wasn't an act of destruction. It was an act of preservation. I had spent my life building this company, protecting it from bad deals, from my father's vanity, from Serafina's incompetence. I had been the silent guardian of my grandfather's legacy. Today, I had simply made the walls I'd built visible to everyone. The entire merger is in digital escrow, Priya confirmed, her eyes on her monitor. The contract, the capital, the patents. Nothing moves without your key. They're locked out of their own victory. Good, I said softly. I turned to leave, my work here done for now. As I reached the door, Priya's voice stopped me. Lena? This is going to be a war. I paused, my hand on the handle. I know, I said, without turning back. But for the first time, they'll be fighting on my territory. My footsteps were quiet as I walked through the now hushed corridors. The employees I passed parted before me, their expressions a mixture of awe and terror. They were used to seeing me as the quiet, reliable shadow in the corner. They weren't prepared for the shadow to have teeth. I didn't go home. Home was a place of ghosts and expectations. Instead, I drove to a small, independent hotel by the waterfront, a place with old brick walls and windows that looked out over the gray, choppy waters of the harbor. I needed to breathe air that didn't belong to the Corbin name. The news of Serafina's collapse reached me the next morning via a clipped, formal text from my father's actual assistant. Serafina is at St. Jude's. Stress-induced hypertensive crisis. You should come. There was no plea, no emotion. It was an instruction. A summons. I didn't go immediately. I sat on the edge of the bed, the phone heavy in my hand, and looked out at the gulls circling over the water. A part of me, the part that had been conditioned for years to be the family caretaker, felt a pang of guilt. But another, newer voice inside me asked a simple question: who takes care of you? When I finally arrived at the hospital, the scent of antiseptic and wilting flowers filled the air. I found her room and paused in the doorway. Serafina was asleep, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her, lost in the starched white sheets. In 4 tube snaked from her arm, dripping a clear, steady rhythm into her veins. Her perfect, cream-colored suit from yesterday was folded neatly on a chair, a sad, empty shell. I didn't go to her bedside. I stood by the window, watching the traffic move on the street below. I felt a strange, hollow quiet inside me. It wasn't pity, not yet. It was a kind of detached sorrow for the both of us, for the roles we had been forced to play for so long. Her eyes fluttered open. She saw me and flinched, as if expecting an attack. "What do you want?" she whispered, her voice raspy. "Your father's assistant texted," I replied, my voice neutral. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped her. "Of course." The chain of command. She tried to sit up, wincing as she pushed herself against the pillows. "Did you come to see your handiwork? Are you proud of yourself?" "This isn't about pride, Serafina." "Then what is it about?" she demanded, her voice gaining a thin, reedy strength. Humiliating me? Humiliating Dad? Ruining the biggest day of our lives. It was the biggest day of my life, I said softly, turning from the window to face her. I negotiated that deal. I built the relationships. I wrote the code that made the merger possible. And you stood up there and called the CEO of our new partner company by the wrong name. The color drained from her face. She knew it was true. I didn't ask for this, she mumbled, looking down at her hands. I never did. He just put me there. He said I was the face and you were the hands. That we were a team. He called me your assistant, I stated, the words still tasting like rust in my mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, genuine and full of a pain I hadn't expected. I know, she whispered. I heard it too. And I stood there, and I didn't say a word to correct him. I was a coward. She finally looked at me, her defenses crumbling. I've always been a coward, Lena. You were always the strong one. You never showed it. And there it was. The truth, laid bare in the sterile quiet of a hospital room. She wasn't my rival. She was another casualty of our father's ambition, a beautifully decorated puppet who was terrified of someone seeing her strings. I was always just trying to keep up, she confessed, her voice breaking. Trying to be the person he told me I was. I'd study the notes you left, try to memorize the terms. But I never really understood them. I was just performing. I was so afraid someone would ask a question I couldn't answer. I walked over and sat in the chair by her bed. I didn't reach for her hand. I didn't offer empty platitudes. I just sat with her in the wreckage. I know, I said. And for the first time, I think she understood that I truly did. We sat in silence for a long time. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of our childhood, but a different kind. It was a space where two people could finally stop performing and just be. Before I left, I paused at the door. Get some rest, Serafina. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Lena, she called out, her voice small. The lockdown, can you fix it? I'm not the one who broke it, I said, and closed the door behind me. My father's countermove came swiftly. By noon, a company-wide memo was released, framing the unfortunate system outage as the result of a malicious internal action and announcing a full investigation. My name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't need to be. The narrative was clear: a disgruntled employee, a saboteur. I was being painted as the villain. They underestimated me. They thought my strength was in code and contracts. They never realized my greatest skill was in documentation. For years, I had kept a private, encrypted server, a digital archive of my own. And it was every email, every project proposal, every performance review, every line of code I had ever written for Corbin Dynamics. It was my shadow ledger, a testament to the work they had tried to erase. I didn't leak it to the press. That would be my father's move, loud, messy, and public. Mine would be quieter, more precise. I chose 3 board members, people I knew from my grandfather's time, individuals who valued integrity over optics. To each, I sent a single, password-protected file. The file contained 3 things: the full code and legal ratification of System Integrity Protocol 7, complete with my father's digital signature of approval. A time-stamped log of the past year of my work on the European merger, including travel itineraries, meeting minutes signed by both parties, and drafts of the contract. A simple, side-by-side comparison of the final contract's key clauses and Serafina's fumbled, inaccurate talking points from her speech. No commentary. No accusations. Just data. The truth doesn't need a defense. The emergency board meeting was called for Friday. The air on the executive floor that morning was thick with tension. When I stepped out of the elevator, the usual hum of activity ceased. People averted their eyes. Whispers followed me down the hall. I walked with my head held high, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. I entered the boardroom not as an assistant, but as a principal. My father was already at the head of the table, his face a thunderous mask. Serafina's chair was conspicuously empty. The 10 board members were arranged along the sides, their faces grim. "This is an outrage, Lena," my father began, his voice shaking with fury. "An act of corporate terrorism. You will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the—" "Marcus," a calm voice interrupted. It was Eleanor Croft, a formidable woman in her late 70s and my grandfather's oldest friend on the board. She held up a tablet, the file I'd sent her displayed on the screen. "We've reviewed the documentation. Lena acted within the legal framework of the company's own bylaws." Bylaws which she signed. Another board member, a quiet man named Mr. Hanson, cleared his throat. "In fact, the protocol was triggered by a clear misrepresentation of leadership during a critical fiduciary event. The system worked exactly as designed." My father stared at them, speechless. The ground was shifting beneath his feet, and he didn't know how to stop it. I took my seat at the table, directly across from him. I placed my own tablet on the polished wood. "The merger is secure," I said, my voice steady and clear. "The assets are protected in the escrow I established. They can be released once the board reaffirms the legitimate leadership on this project." For a moment, no one spoke. The power in the room had recalibrated. It no longer sat with the man at the head of the table. It sat with the data, with the truth. My father looked at me then, and in his eyes, I saw not just anger, but a dawning, horrified understanding. He had never seen me as a player in the game. I was just a pawn, a tool. He had never imagined the tool could have a will of its own. "What do you want, Lena?" he finally asked, his voice stripped of its usual bluster. I met his gaze across the vast expanse of the mahogany table. "I want my name back," I said. That evening, a courier delivered a slender, manila envelope to my hotel room. It bore the seal of my grandfather's private legal estate. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the wax. I had only seen that seal, a falcon clutching an oak branch, a few times in my life. Inside was a single, notarized document and a handwritten letter. The document was an addendum to the original Corbin Dynamics Charter, signed by my grandfather a year before his death. It was a dormant clause, elegant in its simplicity. It stated that in the event of a crisis of leadership or ethical breach by the acting CEO, full controlling interest of his shares, a 51% majority, would immediately transfer to a designated successor to be held in trust. I unfolded the letter, my heart pounding. The familiar, slanted script seemed to rise from the page. "My dearest Lena, if you're reading this, it means the time has come for the silence to end. I have watched you, my quiet girl, my brilliant observer. I saw your father's ambition and Serafina's fragility, and I knew that one day, the weight of this company might fall to the only one strong enough to bear it, you. Your strength is not in your voice, but in your integrity. He will never understand that. He measures power in volume. True power, the kind that lasts, is built on a foundation of truth. You are that foundation. This is not a gift. It is a responsibility. I am not giving you power. I am returning what was always yours to protect. Let your conscience be your guide. I have always trusted it. Your grandfather." I sank onto the bed, the letter clutched in my hand. Tears I didn't know I'd been holding back finally fell, not of sorrow, but of a profound, earth-shaking relief. I was not invisible. He had seen me. All along, he had seen me. The next morning, I did not go to the office. I went to my childhood home, the sprawling stone house where I had learned the language of silence. I walked through the quiet rooms, past the portraits of my father and Serafina, and into the library. There on the wall was the one photograph of me with my grandfather, taken on my 18th birthday. We were both laughing, caught in a moment of shared, unburdened joy. I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer. "File the succession papers," I said. Quietly. The reconciliation, when it came, was not in a boardroom or a courtroom. It was in the hushed quiet of the hospital garden a week later. I found Serafina sitting on a bench, wrapped in a blanket, watching the autumn leaves fall. She looked up as I approached, her face pale but her eyes clear for the first time in years. "I heard," she said softly, "about grandfather's letter." I nodded, sitting beside her. "He always knew, didn't he?" she murmured, more to herself than to me. "He knew I wasn't capable. He knew you were in an impossible position," I corrected her gently. We sat in a comfortable silence, the kind sisters are supposed to share. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small. "Now," I said, looking out at the garden, "we build something real. On a true foundation." She looked at me, a flicker of the old fear in her eyes. "Is there a place for me in it?" "There's a place for Serafina," I replied. "The real one, not the one our father invented." I stood up. "But you have to find her first. And you have to do it for yourself. Not for him, and not for me." She nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, but of release. I left her there, among the falling leaves, to begin her own journey out of the silence. My father and I never had a final, dramatic confrontation. There was no shouting, no recriminations. When the papers were served, he simply abdicated. He retired, retreating to a life of quiet obscurity, the applause finally having faded. His silence was the loudest confession of all. As for me, I am still the student of silence. But now I understand it differently. It is not a place of hiding, but a place of strength. It is the space where you can finally hear your own voice. I am Lena Corbin. I am the president of Corbin Dynamics. My name is on the door, on the contracts, on the charter. But my legacy will not be written in words. It will be seen in the strength of the foundation, in the integrity of the walls, and in the quiet, unshakable truth of the work. It will be a house built not for show, but to stand the test of time. Did I handle it correctly? Some might say I should have fought louder, sooner. But I believe I did more than fight. I endured, I observed, and I waited for the right moment to let the truth speak for itself. After all, you can't win an argument against silence. You can only listen to what it has to say.